You step into a room. No one says anything cruel, no one points, no one laughs. But something in your body pulls back, tightens, hesitates, hides. Your smile shows up on time, but it feels rehearsed. Your posture is practiced. You speak, but the words feel filtered, edited in real time by something older than thought. When you leave, you're exhausted, not from the people, from the pretending. And you ask yourself quietly, why is being seen so hard? There was no obvious harm, no insult, no violation. Yet your chest still coils with tension, your jaw holds secrets, and your nervous system whispers, "Be careful, they're watching." And the strange thing is, you don't even know when it started. Maybe it was a classroom, maybe a dinner table, maybe the first time someone said, "You're too much." Or worse, when they said nothing at all and just looked away. What if that moment didn't leave a memory? What if it left a message? A silent agreement written in the language of the body. To stay loved, stay small. To be safe, be less. Now you're here, years later. Still adapting, still shrinking, still choosing invisibility dressed as politeness. And the shame? It didn't fade. It just learned to live quietly beneath your skin. You've called it anxiety, sensitivity, introversion. You've blamed your personality, your childhood, your overthinking. But what if it isn't about who you are at all? What if it's about what your body had to become to survive connection? What if shame doesn't live in your mind, but in your muscles, your posture, your breath? It's not a thought, it's a survival code. A nervous system on high alert, shaped by moments where authenticity meant risk. Moments where being real came at a cost. You think you're fragile, but maybe you're just still carrying the weight of the mask. So here's the real question. What would it mean to stop performing and let your body exhale for the first time in years? What would happen if you no longer feared your own visibility? What if shame has stayed in the body? Because it never had permission to leave? Let's begin there, beneath the surface. In the place where truth has been waiting quietly to be felt. Shame is not an emotion that simply visits you. It's an emotion that inhabits you. It doesn't knock on the door. It builds the house. It decorates the walls. It whispers through the vents. And for many people, by the time they realize they're living with shame, it's already fused with their very sense of identity. But how does that happen? How does something invisible become so embedded that your own body forgets where you end and it begins? To answer that, we have to look at the structure of shame, not as a flaw in the psyche, but as a protective adaptation. Because that's what shame really is, a strategy. Dr. Paul Gilbert, creator of compassion-focused therapy, explains shame as a survival mechanism rooted in our evolutionary need for belonging. Early humans depended on tribes. To be exiled meant death. So when we sense disapproval or threat to connection, our bodies learn to shrink, submit, and mask the parts of us that made others uncomfortable. Not because we were wrong, but because we wanted to survive. And while the tribe is now an office, a classroom, a family dinner, or a group chat, the nervous system doesn't know the difference. It still responds as though visibility equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals danger. Carl Jung offered another angle. That shame arises from the shadow self, the parts of us we've been taught to disown, not because they're evil, but because they threaten the image we've been told we must maintain to be loved. So we cut away our natural impulses, our anger, our neediness, our softness, our wildness. We call it maturing, growing up, being normal. But the cost is high. We become strangers to ourselves. And we pay that cost, not in thought, but in posture, in stress, in silence, in how deeply we breathe when we walk into a room. This is where John Cacioppo's research on loneliness intersects powerfully. His studies showed that chronic loneliness actually rewires the brain, making us hyper-vigilant for social threats. And what is shame, if not the internalized fear of rejection, the belief that connection will only end in pain? So we learn to stay quiet, not because we want to disappear, but because we fear the consequence of being fully seen. Susan Cain, in her work on introversion, pointed to how modern Western culture has pathologized inwardness. We reward charisma, dominance, quick speech, while labeling sensitivity and quiet observation as issues to overcome. But what if those traits are simply the outward signs of people who carry shame, like an echo inside the body? Franz Kafka wrote characters who felt this haunting disconnection from society, souls trapped in systems they couldn't explain. Albert Camus described a loneliness so deep it became philosophical, the absurdity of existing in a world that refuses to reflect who you are back to you. And Olivia Lang in The Lonely City described shame not just as an emotion, but as a barrier, a veil between us and the world that keeps us suspended in a kind of emotional exile. So we perform, we adapt, we hide. Not because we are fake, but because we once learned, subtly, silently, somatically, that being real came at too high a cost. Shame then is not weakness, it's armor, heavy, ancient, and devastatingly effective. But armor isn't identity. And protection is not peace. The question is no longer just, why does shame stay in the body? But what happens to the soul when it forgets it's wearing armor at all? Let's go deeper. Shame doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself in the middle of your day. It creeps. It moves in silence through your daily decisions, through the way you phrase a text message, through how quickly you say sorry when no apology is needed, through how your shoulders subtly curl inward when someone makes eye contact for too long. Shame rewires how you move through the world, without you ever noticing. It becomes the reason you don't ask for what you need, the reason you minimize your successes, the reason you feel safest when you're invisible but also devastated by being overlooked. You crave connection, but fear exposure. You want love, but brace for abandonment. You keep yourself small, even while aching to be seen. And all of this quietly shapes your entire life. What's cruel about shame is that it disguises itself as personality. You think you're naturally anxious, naturally withdrawn, naturally unworthy. But many of these behaviors are not traits, they're adaptations. Your body has learned to anticipate rejection before it happens, preparing for hurt so that maybe it will hurt less. That preparation hardens into a posture, a pattern, a reality. Over time, the shame response becomes automatic. Not something you think, something you are. Neuroscience confirms this. When an experience is too painful or socially threatening, the brain encodes it not just as memory, but as sensoromotor activation, a full-body alert system. Trauma researchers like Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges have shown how chronic emotional stress leads to hypervigilance in the nervous system. Shame in this light is a form of low-grade persistent trauma, a freeze state, not loud panic, but quiet paralysis. And when the body doesn't feel safe, it stops letting in new information. You don't learn new scripts, you repeat the old ones. Even when no one is hurting you anymore, your body behaves like it's still under threat. This is the invisible tragedy of shame. It makes safety feel unsafe. Intimacy feels like risk. Stillness feels like exposure. Success feels like a setup for disappointment. Compliments feel like lies. You recoil not from harm, but from the possibility that someone might one day confirm the thing you've always feared, that you're not enough. And this fear doesn't just affect individuals, it becomes culture. We build systems on it. Schools that reward silence over curiosity, workplaces that confuse confidence with competence, families that teach emotional suppression as strength. Social media platforms that monetize insecurity by feeding you 1,000 curated lives to compare yourself to. Shame is profitable, predictable, easy to control. It creates perfect consumers and obedient citizens, people too afraid to question, too unsure to stand out, too preoccupied with their own perceived flaws to disrupt anything. It doesn't yell, it just molds quietly, efficiently. And what's worse, it isolates you. Because shame convinces you that you're the only one feeling it. That everyone else has figured out how to belong. That everyone else feels worthy. That everyone else has a map while you're walking blind. But the truth is far more human. Shame is everywhere. In the text not sent, the boundary not set, the yes that should have been a no. It's in the moment you hide your joy because someone else might feel less than. In the silence after a compliment when you don't know how to accept it. It's everywhere, but we don't talk about it because we're ashamed of shame. So we keep going, carrying it like background noise, like gravity, like breath, until one day we begin to wonder, what would life feel like if I didn't walk through it bracing for judgment? Not performing, not shrinking. Just existing. Let's go there next. The body remembers everything. But the body can also learn something new. Not through logic, not through affirmations, but through experience. Moments where shame is met not with judgment, but with compassion. Where visibility is met not with punishment, but with safety. Where the nervous system, once locked in survival, is gently invited to rest. This is where the rebellion begins. And it doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like presence. It looks like pausing in the middle of a self-deprecating thought and asking, where did I first learn to speak to myself this way? It looks like breathing, deeply, when the instinct is to hold your breath and stay small. It looks like noticing how your voice gets softer when you talk about your needs, and choosing to speak just a little louder. Breaking free isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to the part of you that existed before the performance, before the script, before the mask. Carl Jung wrote that freedom doesn't come from perfection. It comes from integrating the shadow, from turning toward the parts of yourself you were told to hide. That includes your sadness, your anger, your desires, your intensity, your softness. The rebellion is not rage. It's integration. And integration requires a radical shift to stop seeing shame as the enemy and start seeing it as a signal. Shame, when listened to with compassion, can reveal exactly where the wound lives and where the truth is waiting to be reclaimed. Gabor Maté says trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you when connection is broken. Healing, then, is about restoring that connection, not only to others, but to yourself. To the body you learn to escape, to the voice you learn to silence, to the emotions you learn to mistrust. You break free by feeling. You learn to tolerate what was once intolerable, the heat of discomfort, the throb of vulnerability, the ache of being truly seen, not as punishment, but as passage. A quiet moment of eye contact without looking away. A story told without apology. A need expressed without shame. These are rebellions, not because they're loud, but because they're honest. The world teaches you to adapt, to perform, to perfect. But the deeper act of rebellion is to be authentic, even when you're not polished, even when you're still figuring it out. And here's something even more radical. You don't have to earn the right to be whole. Not by healing faster, not by being more confident, not by checking all the boxes of self-improvement. You are already whole. Shame is just the fog that's kept you from seeing it. This isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming honest enough to be free. So, the rebellion isn't a roar, it's a return. To your body, your breath, your truth. The one that says, I am allowed to be seen. I am allowed to exist without apology. And maybe, just maybe, you're not here to be accepted by the world. Maybe you're here to accept the part of you the world was never ready for. That's where we're going next. To the core of it all. To the one truth shame can't survive. There's a moment, quiet, sudden, when you realize the shame you've carried isn't yours. Not really. It was inherited, imprinted, installed. Like an old operating system installed without your permission, it became the silent blueprint for how you've moved through the world. But it never came from your essence. It came from the stories, the stares, the silences. From the parent who couldn't handle your tears. From the teacher who rewarded your obedience but not your curiosity. From the friend who made your truth feel like a burden. You thought it was a mirror. It was a projection. And the most powerful realization is this. Shame only survives in the absence of self-truth. When you forget who you are beneath the adaptations, shame thrives. When you mistake the mask for your face, shame feels permanent. But the very moment you begin to reconnect with your inner knowing, shame starts to lose its grip. Not because it disappears, but because it's seen for what it is, a mechanism, a defense, a scar from the time you were forced to choose survival over expression. Scars don't need to be erased to heal. They just need to be understood. Irvin D. Yalom wrote that we fear death not because life is meaningless, but because we fear we haven't truly lived. In the same way, shame isn't just about being wrong. It's about fearing that who we truly are will never be loved, that if we remove the mask, the world will recoil. But that's the final illusion. Because the deeper truth is this: you were never meant to be accepted by everyone. You were meant to be yourself. And yourself is not a brand. It's not a role. It's not a persona crafted to survive scrutiny. It's the you beneath the shame. The you that existed before the performance began. That you is still here, still waiting. Not to be rescued, not to be remade. Just to be welcomed back. When you stop running from shame, you realize it was never asking for your perfection. It was asking for your attention. When you give it that, gentle, grounded, and curious, you begin to reclaim something sacred: wholeness. And wholeness doesn't mean polished. It doesn't mean healed in some idealistic linear way. It means complete as you are. Soft edges, unfinished chapters, open scars. It means being willing to walk through the world as someone no longer ruled by fear of rejection. Because the real healing isn't found in being seen by others. It's found in seeing yourself, clearly and without flinching. So now the final question becomes a quiet invitation. What happens when you no longer live to be acceptable, but live to be real? When you no longer bend yourself into shapes to fit in places that never deserved you? When the body that carried your shame finally learns what it feels like to rest, not in hiding, but in truth? No more masks. No more shrinking. No more exile from your own presence. Just you, here, breathing. And maybe for the first time in years, free.